Before we get started on the Dharma talk, please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Dearest Venerable Teacher, dearest Sangha, good afternoon, Happy New Year. I hope everyone had a festive and safe holiday and New Year. So today we will continue on our journey of the Eightfold Path. Last time we discussed the first of the Eightfold Path, which is right view. Today we'll be discussing the second path, which is right thinking or right intention. I've had a pretty difficult, emotionally difficult week, so I've had to use every ounce of mental energy to maintain my right thinking. Fortunately, they weren't thoughts of anger, but I honestly wish they were, because they're easier to subdue than thoughts of distress and sadness and whatnot. But today we'll be going over that second truth, or second path. So in Sanskrit, the right thinking is samyak samkalpa. Samyak samkalpa. So right thinking and right intention is the volitional aspect of the path, right? It's the mental energy that controls our speech and actions, right? As I always said, everything starts as a thought first, right? It goes from your thought, turns into speech, turns into action. So everything that we do and say always initiates as a thought. So when we have right thinking and those right intentions, that turns into right speech and right action, right? So it kind of continues and trickles down correctly. And then the Buddha explains that in right intention is threefold. So there's the intention of renunciation, the intention of goodwill and harmlessness, right? And so as we go down the path of the Eightfold Path, and as we start to read and actually practice and put into practice these practices, we will eventually see how they all kind of merge together, right? And they're all interdependent of each other. They all have to work together to create that perfect mind, right? Because the whole goal of the Eightfold Path is to eradicate the 3 poisons, right? The 3 poisons of the mind: ignorance, greed, and anger. And by eradicating those, then we are able to master the Four Noble Truths, right? Because in right thinking, as we go through life, right? And I'm gonna bring the example of Cynthia and Bobby bringing up their desire to take refuge in the 5 precepts, right? And so we're going through some questions, and one thing that I think is important in Buddhist practice, and really in any religious practice or spiritual practice, is intention, right? So the 5 precepts are to abstain from killing, abstain from lying, abstain from sexual misconduct, abstain from stealing, and abstain from intoxicants. These aren't necessarily rules that are like, hey, if you break these rules, you're going to be in trouble, right? These are really just self-promises, right, to have and live a better life. They're common sense rules. They're not really rules or regulations that are like dire consequences or anything, right? These are just to help you to live a healthier, better, more fulfilling, happier life. But people will misunderstand some of these precepts as hardcore rules, right? It's like, I will definitely not kill. I will go to the extent of not even eating meat, right? I'll be vegetarian, I'll be vegan. I'll live on water and bread if I have to. Right? That's not really what the precept is telling you. The precept is telling you is to live a life with the intention to protect life, with the intention to abstain as much as possible, to do the least amount of harm as possible, right? And so every day we kill, whether we know it or knowingly or unknowingly, we kill something, right? As we walk through gardens, as we walk through streets and wherever, we're stepping on ants, we're stepping on bugs, we're killing things that fly by as we go down the highway. We may run into a dog, a cat, a deer, right? So killing is happening whether we like it or we don't like it. But what makes it good or bad is the intention behind that act. If you're driving down the road and there's a lot of deer in this area, so if you're driving down the road and you see a deer, and if you say, oh, there's a deer, I'm gonna hit it because I feel like hitting it. Your intention there is a bad intention, right? There's ill will behind that intention. Otherwise, if you go down the road and you see the deer, like, oh, there's a deer, let me slow down, or let me stop, or let me go around, whatever, right? So your intention there is positive. So when our intentions are positive, it creates that goodwill. But if the intentions are negative, then it creates unwholesome actions, unwholesome karma. So even if you break a precept, for instance, depending on what the intention was behind that precept is what will make it truly breakable or not, right? And then this is a quote that the Buddha sums up for this, is that when a person holds a wrong view, his deeds, words, plans, and purposes grounded in that view will lead to suffering, while a person who holds the right view, his deeds, words, plans, and purposes grounded in that view will lead to happiness. And because we have greed and aversion, right, and those are thoughts, right, those are mental formations, and so they're able to be eroded in a way, right? And because usually the way we think throughout the day and what we think on and how we think about things changes our mood, changes our perspective, changes our feelings toward things, right? So what I've been practicing all week that I've drained myself through is a process called thought substitution. So you're essentially changing what's negative into a positive, right? So if you're feeling down, you're feeling blue, you're feeling angry, you're essentially taking out the anger and replacing it with happiness or kindness or generosity or whatever it may be, right? Whatever you're thinking, you're essentially you're changing the perspective that you're having. That way, hopefully, that you won't continue to hang on to grasp on that negativity, right? Because part of our suffering is grasping. It's the desire to hold on to things. And we end up holding on to anger more than any other emotion the longest, right? Because we feel like we are doing some sort of good to ourselves by being angry. I'm going to be angry. I'm going to think logically when I'm angry. No one thinks logically when they're angry. But that's kind of the mentality that we have, that we can somehow think clearer through anger. And that's obviously not the case, right? And so if we're able to substitute those angry thoughts, right? And I use the example of road rage all the time. Instead of thinking of wanting to cut that person off who cut you off, instead of wanting to flip them off, to curse them out, to do whatever people do, essentially just change that mindset. Okay, he cut me off. Maybe, again, you do what we've always been talking about. You put yourself in their shoes. Maybe there's someone pregnant in the car. Maybe someone's bleeding out to death. Maybe someone's rushing to the hospital, rushing to somewhere to get to, right? We don't know their situation, but because we make up a story for them, we make up a situation for them, that just drives that anger that we are carrying because they cut us off. So if we're able to substitute that negative thinking with positive thinking, with kindness and compassion and, just and understanding, that'll help us to alleviate that anger much quicker than usual, hopefully. And so through the intention of renunciation, right? And renunciation here is essentially just the renunciation here is to acknowledge that the pull of desire, this needs to be resisted, right? And eventually abandoned. Because this desire is, as we all know through our teachings and practices, is the root of suffering, right? It's the second noble truth. Desire is the root of our suffering. And so until we're able to acknowledge these desires, acknowledge the fact that we need to release them, then we're really never going to be free to be free, right? But one thing that we need to do is work on understanding those desires. Because if we understand the desire, understand where it's coming from, why it's there, why it arises in the first place, then we're able to really see clearly the root cause of that desire. And so that way it becomes less work for us to want to let it go, right? Because sometimes we think that, oh, to get rid of desire, we have to get rid of things. We have to get rid of my house, I have to get rid of my car, I have to get rid of my possessions, etc., etc. That's not really the case. The desire here is the attachment that we have to those desires. The attachment that we have to the things that we cling to our possessions, to the people that we are with, right? And so when we're able to understand exactly how that desire is controlling our life, right? Because we have this unfortunate habitual feeling that possessions and materialistic things is the source of our happiness. And that's, hopefully, most of us will realize that's not the case, right? Why is that not the case? Because we think in our ignorant minds that our new house, our new car, our new phone will give us that happiness that's kind of missing in our life, right? The new relationship, the new job, the new house is going to fill that gap. But what we don't understand is, yes, though it might fill that gap temporarily, it will not last. And that's one of the main causes of why we suffer when things disappear, when things break, when relationships end, when life ends. We become so distraught because we don't understand that these things don't last forever. We don't understand the impermanence in these things. So when we learn to understand desire and understand and acknowledge and accept that things are impermanent, then those desires will naturally lessen. Those desires will naturally kind of just flow away. And our attachment to the desires will also naturally flow away. And then we have the intention of goodwill, right, which is opposing ill will, the feelings of anger and aversion. And the Buddha gives two ineffective ways of handling ill will. And the one is to yield to it, right? To express aversion by bodily or verbal actions. So we think that when we lash out, we kind of get this anger out of our system, right? When we hit things or break things, we feel like we're getting it out of our system. But it's really not. We are just kind of pushing it down a little bit more because we're still holding on to that anger. We're still holding on to that aversion. And the second approach is repression, right? So we're repressing the feelings of anger, right? And I used to do that all the time. I don't lash out, but I'm going to hold on to that grudge and that anger for as long as humanly possible. But what happens in that case is then, after a while, it gets built up so much that you're going to explode. You're going to lash out in violence. You're going to lash out to people, right? You're going to ruin relationships. You're going to cause this poisonous environment, right? And create self-contempt and depression, right? And so we really have to learn that we cannot yield to anger, we cannot repress it either. And so the Buddha tells us that you have to understand it, you have to listen to yourself, you have to ask yourself why, right? That's why we practice the why meditation. Why am I angry? Where is this coming from? Why is this like that? Why is this like this and that? You know, you dig deep down to try to find the root core of that anger. And that way we're able to deal with the actual source versus dealing with the external things. Because the external things are just the triggers that cause it in the first place, but they are not the source of the anger. They're just the triggers. And so if we can get rid of a trigger all we want, but as long as the source is still there, as long as that root is still there, the weeds are still going to grow, the grass is still going to grow, the plant's still going to grow. So to counter ill will, we have to practice metta, the loving kindness, right? I think most of us should be familiar with metta. And so when we practice metta bhavana, the meditation on loving kindness, this is the practice where we are developing this intense kindness and love toward all beings. And so the metta meditation that is typically practiced is we sit in meditation and we are essentially contemplating the metta phrases. May I be free of suffering. May I be free of anger. May my mind be at ease. Right? And so you contemplate, may I be healthy, may I be safe, etc. Right? There's a whole list of metta phrases, but essentially that's the gist of it. May I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be safe, may my mind be at ease, may I be free from suffering. And you practice that, you develop self-love, right? And when we're able to do that for ourselves, then we can continue that practice for other people. We can start easy. We can start with someone that we love, our significant other, our parents, our children. May they be happy, may they be safe, may they be healthy, may their mind be at ease, may they be free from suffering. And we can move on to acquaintances, maybe a neighbor. May they be happy, may they be safe, may they be healthy, may their mind be at ease, may they be free of suffering. And we can move on to strangers, the mailman, the trash man, I don't know, may they be healthy, may they be safe, may they be happy, etc. And then then we move on to people we may not necessarily like, right? In Buddhism, we don't believe in enemies necessarily, but we all have people that we don't always get along with or necessarily like. And so we have to develop the loving kindness for them as well. May they be happy, may they be safe, may their mind be at ease, may they be free from suffering. And then finally, we extend that to all beings. May all beings be happy, may all beings be safe, may all beings be healthy, may their mind be at ease, may they be free from suffering. And we do that because we have to acknowledge that though we are all different, we're all one human race, we're all interconnected in some way, shape, or form. Right? In Buddhism, it's believed that we are all related, up to 7 generations related. So in last life, you could have been my father, you could have been my mother, you could have been my wife, my husband, my children, right? And so no matter who or where we are, we're still related, right? And so we use that example so that we can treat everyone as our loved ones. We can treat the strangers on the road as our parents, as our significant others. We can treat the mailman as our brother, the checkout lady as our sister, right? And so when we're able to develop that compassion and love for everyone, then we will naturally just be more open to things, naturally accept things when they happen, whether they're good or bad, right? And then we have the intention of harmlessness. That's a tongue twister for me, which is thought that's guided by compassion, right? By karuna, by the wish that everyone be free from suffering, right? And so loving kindness is the wish for everyone, for all beings to be free loving kindness is the desire that everyone be free from ill will, right, and have well-being. And compassion is the thought that all beings be free from suffering. Because just like ourselves, everybody here wants to be free from suffering, right? And so we have to extend that compassionate thought to all others as well. And so just like with metta meditation, we have the compassion meditation as well. And for compassion meditation, it's essentially the same, but slightly different. And so the Buddha taught us that it's easier to start with someone who is already undergoing some sort of suffering, right? That way we have an object of compassion already there. So if I'm meditating on Cynthia because she's suffering, maybe she has COVID or something, right? She doesn't, but I'm saying if she were to have it, she's already afflicted with suffering. So she is my object of meditation now. So now I'm meditating on the wish that she be free from that suffering, right? Because just like myself, who wants to be free from suffering, she wants to be free from suffering as well. So we develop that compassion. We build it up, where it's really, really strong. And then we can extend that compassionate thought to others as well. And so we can move on from Cynthia, someone we knew who's suffering, and then we can extend that out to everybody else, to a point where we can extend it to people who are superficially happy, right? Maybe they acquire their happiness in immoral ways, right? And we know that they cheated their way through life to get to where they are, right? Now they're rich and famous, but they did it the wrong way, right? And we know that, but we still want to develop compassion for them as well. We do that because even though we know that they acquired their happiness or their health and wealth in immoral ways, we know because of karma that they will eventually have to reap those negative benefits eventually, right? And when they do, they will have intense suffering. And so we have to acknowledge, even though they are now maybe physically and superficially happy, they will eventually not be in that same state. So we have to extend our compassion, our loving kindness to all beings. I feel like I'm slightly off topic, but the point to all these practices is that so that we can develop the way we think of things and change our mindset, because sometimes we react automatically and defensively, right? If someone pushes us, if someone yells at us, for most people, the automatic action after that is to yell back, hey, watch where you're going, right? Or push back, or hit back, whatever it is, right? And so, but if we're able to watch our thinking as these things happen, and develop correct thinking, develop correct thought processes just by thinking, then our intentions of what comes out of our mouth will be correct. The intentions that come out through our actions will be correct. If we're able to develop, maintain correct thinking, because how many times has anyone said something that they later regretted? 5,000 hands up right here. Totally guilty, right? Which is part of what my whole downfall this week was said. I said something I completely regretted. And so once something is said, you can not take it back, obviously, right? And you can say the nicest of things to people all you want, but the moment you say something negative, the moment you say something that hurts or makes them feel indifferent or distressed or whatever, they're always going to remember that piece, right? They'll never remember all the goodness. They'll remember only the bad, right? And I think everyone's kind of like that. So if we're able to really stop and be mindful of things, right? This is why mindfulness is a very important practice. Because if you are mindful of what you think, say, and do, you're able to control your life much more easily. You're able to control what you think, control what you say, and control what you do much simpler. That way, we won't have to worry about saying things that we will later regret. We don't have to worry about the negative actions that we've done or said or thought of. So as we go through situations in life and we become mindful, right, especially in difficult situations, in situations where we may be arguing with someone, for instance, if we're able to kind of pause the natural reactions that we have, right? Because typically when you're arguing with someone, you're already retaliating. You're already thinking in advance what to say back to them versus listening deeply to them, trying to understand where they're coming from, trying to understand what message they're actually trying to come across. We're already thinking of these advanced insults, the comebacks, right? That's part of my issues. I'm very sarcastically witty, and so I have quick comebacks that put me in bad situations, but that's neither here or there. But the point is that if you're being mindful and you're able to pause that thought, that negative thinking, then you're able to reflect and recollect correctly. That way you're able to say things correctly and do things correctly. Because it all starts in the mind. And that's your first checkpoint. And so if you're watching or thinking, your first checkpoint's right there. If you're watching or thinking, it's correct thinking, then you're able to move on to correct speech. Maybe you said something bad, or maybe you said something good, but that's still a second checkpoint, because then it moves on to action, right? So you have all these checkpoints where you have places to stop yourself from thinking, saying, and doing things that are negative. But whatever you say or do, speech and action, all comes back to thought. It all comes back to that thinking. That's the source of all our speech and action. So that's the most important piece, is the thinking and our intentions behind those thinkings. Okay, I'm out of time. Any questions, concerns, emotional outbursts? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so something that you mentioned, you were saying that we have to have the right perspective or the right view and to kind of put ourselves in the other person's shoes. And then another thing that you mentioned was ill will or the right will. And one thing that I'm having a little bit of a challenge is because, for example, I have a situation and this person has very ill will in their actions, and I keep having the desire for them to act right. And it sounds very funny, but basically something like the situation has already been resolved. But in my personhood, I still want them to acknowledge that they did wrong or that they harmed me or that they, and in my intelligence, I understand that it's pointless because it does not affect me either way. You know what I mean? It's their karma, it's their, but how do you deal with that want of that person to oh my God, I was so happy to see it. You know what I mean? Where does that fall? Is it something you meditate, or is it, do I not have the right perspective of it? Where would you?
That's two things. One is having expectations. Two, it's our ego. So we all have expectations. We have expectations of how we want people to act and react. We have expectations of how our lives should be, how other people's lives should be, right? And so when those expectations are not met, then we're feeling negative about it. They should apologize to me because they knew they're in the wrong. They should, pay me back, or they should say this, or they should say that. These are expectations that we have because our ego is trying to defend itself, right? Our ego is like, hey, You're clearly in the right and they're in the wrong. We deserve an apology. We deserve, to be treated correctly, to be acknowledged that we are in the right and they're in the wrong, right? So you have to look about it as, where is it coming from? Why do you have that desire of wanting them to correct themselves or wanting them to apologize, right? And you already said it doesn't make any difference, right? And it doesn't. Whether they apologize for what they did or not, it makes no difference. But we have that expectation of them to, we have expectations of them to apologize, right? Because we think we're in the right and they're in the wrong. Whether that's true or not, it doesn't matter, right? What does it matter? How does that change your life? Whether they apologize or don't, it doesn't, right? And so part of that is, in the three poisons, that's ignorance, right? Because we are wanting something to be different than what it already is, right? They didn't apologize. We want the situation where they do apologize. Vinny, can you open the door? Or someone who's closer there? I think the door is locked. So if we're able to release expectations and then just accept things as they are without having to worry about them apologizing or not apologizing, then it's easier for us to let it go, right? And that's a big practice in Buddhism, is to let go. And in order to let go, we have to let go of expectations. We have to let go of things wanting to be different than what they are. Otherwise, that's just going to cause you suffering.
So it's both living in the past because it didn't happen the way that I expected it, and also kind of the wrong view of it because it doesn't go into it. It's ego, right?
It's ego. It's ego. Release expectations. Release your expectations.
Where is the ignorance, though? The ignorance of just not knowing that it doesn't make a difference?
Ignorance here is not accepting things as they are. Right? Ignorance in Buddhism doesn't mean stupidity. It just means that you do not accept things as they are. Right? It's cold. You don't want it to be cold. You want it to be 75,000 degrees. Right? That's ignorance, because you can't change what is. Right? The lady's not apologizing to you. You want her to apologize. You're trying to change something that already is. Right? So ignorance here is just not accepting what is. Any other questions? No? Okay, good. So we will transfer merit and then we will go to chanting. We will do New Year chanting in our book. I forgot what page it is, but we'll look into it later. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. For any positive karmic action we have accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merit to all sentient beings and wish them full enlightenment.